So understand that when we exercise at a fairly high intensity, arguably this curve will shift ever so slightly to the right. And that will also lower the pH and it'll increase the CO2 content. What's going on, everybody? Hey, it's Hopper. We're back at it. We got another great topic for you. Of course, we have Brutus, who never says anything, even though he always gives me the eyeball every time that I try to say something funny, and he makes fun of me. And of course, we got the Ultimate Warrior. The topic for this video is ice baths. Yes, ice baths, cold plunges, whatever terminology we want to use. We will discuss what happens from a physiological standpoint when we expose our body to colder temperatures. We will discuss one topic that I have not really seen discussed with respect to ice baths, because I'm well aware that there is many other activities that happen in our body when we expose ourselves to these colder temperatures. And I will put a couple of charts and diagrams and references through here as usual. However, what we will discuss is the oxygen-hemoglobin dissociation curve. And I love this chart. It is extremely valuable, and I'll write it up here in more of an abbreviated form, and I'll put some links below in the description for some excellent charts on it. Okay, here it is. We have the oxygen hemoglobin dissociation curve. And this is actually quite simple. When we expose ourselves to warmer temperatures versus colder temperatures, there's a couple activities that happens with our red blood cells, which is where the percent saturation comes into play. The percent saturation will actually discuss the red blood cells, and through here, because each blood cell will have 4 spots for the oxygen to bind onto. And if we have a baseline curve that'll look like this, when you go to the hospital and you check in and they take your vitals and they put that thing on your finger, what they're doing is they're testing the percent saturation of your red blood cells for the oxygen. And if your percent saturation is extremely low, then the ability for your body to carry oxygen to your tissues is extremely low, and that is dangerous. When we work out, when we exert ourselves, and we generate a stimulus or an overload, our tissues will generally start to require oxygen, and your body will start to respire, and your heart is beating. And with all of this extra movement, of course, comes thermal heat. And I've drawn numerous graphs on here that show the stretch reflex of tissues, and we never get 100% back from the actual stretch of the tissues. It's roughly about 80%. And so that thermal heat, when we move our tissues, will cause us to sweat. I actually have a video on sweating mechanics. It's up here. Please go check that out. It demonstrates how we actually sweat and why if we sweat easier, that's actually a sign that we're in a little bit better physical condition. So when we expose our body to exercise, the temperatures of our bodies will typically increase. And when we expose ourselves to that, we will usually have what's called a right shift. So if we are extremely hot and our tissues are respiring, we can make the argument that this curve will shift a little bit to the right. And as you can see, the percent saturation of the blood cells will slightly decline. And understand the independent variable right here is actually the partial pressures of oxygen. And the partial pressures are measured in mercury. As we move up in elevation, there actually is not less oxygen, it's just less partial pressure. And the alveoli in our lungs work through a pressure gradient.
Good to see somebody who doesn't buckle under the pressure.
What would you know about pressure?
We will focus mostly on the percent saturation and through here. And we just need to understand that as we generate an excessive amount of heat through a workout, the normal curve of this dissociation curve will do a right shift. When we finish our training, let's say we worked out hard for an hour and a half. When we finish, the mechanical work is done. And the physiological work, however, continues to be productive because it needs to bring our body back to homeostasis. This idea gets into a notion called your EPOC, which is your excess post-exercise oxygen consumption. And I also have a video for that as well. I'll put a card for it right here. If we were to just sit down and rest after a workout, it would take your body a fair amount of time to return back to homeostasis and for this curve to be shifted left a little bit more back to that normal reference point. However, if we expose ourselves to extremely cold temperatures for 6, 7, 10 minutes, somewhere in through there, to the point where our body is shivering a little bit, the shivering is your tissues trying to regenerate heat. And that is an excellent reference point to tell our body that we are becoming cold enough to where that we can stop the ice bath.
We're there.
And this portion, if we shift this curve left, then as you can see, we have a higher percent saturation of those red blood cells. So let's say in theory, if we have worked out and those red blood cells are carrying those oxygen molecules like crazy to the respiring tissues, and they're unloading that oxygen, the moment that we expose those tissues to extremely cold temperatures and the need for oxygen drops drastically, there won't be a need for the oxygen to be unloaded so much, and it brings our body back to homeostasis much faster. With respect to weightlifting, there is a fair amount of evidence that suggests that we should not take an ice bath directly after we work out, because there are certain benefits to the inflammation that is presented in our body from the workout, as well as there are other pieces of literature that demonstrate that certain signals are blunted from the cold treatments. So when you take an ice bath is basically up to the individual. I prefer to take the ice bath as soon as possible so I don't procrastinate on it and I continue to just kind of put it off. I want to jump in there and get it done as soon as possible. And I basically want to cool my body off and return back to homeostasis as soon as possible. So understand that when we exercise at a fairly high intensity, arguably this curve will shift ever so slightly to the right. And that will also lower the pH and it'll increase the CO2 content. Once we, and that was actually in the Apollo 13 movie where the CO2 was so high that there was arguably a right shift in the oxygen-hemoglobin dissociation curve. And so that's why they had to filter out that CO2.
Just breathe normal, fellas.
The moment that we finish our exercise, we jump into a cold plunge or an ice bath, and we will shift that oxygen-hemoglobin dissociation curve to the left.
Slide to the left.
And return back to homeostasis much, much faster. Again, I know there is numerous pieces of literature out there that discuss the other hormonal effects of ice baths. I just wanted to cover this idea of the dissociation curve because I haven't seen it discussed yet. And we will feel so much better after that ice bath and cool your body down and bring it back to homeostasis. And it shortens that EPOC, that excess post-exercise oxygen consumption, because depending on the intensity of the exercise that we did, that EPOC can last a fair amount of time. And we want to cut that EPOC in half or cut it down by a third or 80%, whatever that number is, so that we can return back to homeostasis faster and train at a higher intensity the following day. So that's it for this video. For those of you that have any questions, again, put them in the comments below. Please like this video and subscribe for much more content. And if possible, please share this content on other social media platforms. For those of you that wish to support this channel, there are links below to donate. And once again, of course, Brutus didn't say anything. We will get back to that later. We'll see you all next time. And no more high five again. Man, love you too.